Welcome to Alternatives Podcasts. My name's Venetia and I'm Head of Marketing at Alternatives. And today I'm speaking to Steve Nobel, who is running a workshop for us later this year called Spiritual Transitions on the 4th of October. And Steve is an author, a book mentor, creative writing facilitator, a coach, and the former director at Alternatives, where he was here for 13 years. And he's coming back to offer this workshop later this year. Welcome, Steve.
Hi, Venetia. Thank you.
You're welcome. And Steve, I just wanted to, I've read a couple of your books. I've read The Enlightenment of Work, which I loved.
Yeah.
I really loved it. I keep it around to refer to it often when I'm doing things. And I'm just reading Personal Transitions at the moment, which I'm finding very interesting.
Yeah.
And I was really moved by the story of how you were going through a transition beginning in 2010, and which lasted 3 or 4 years, and all the personal stories that you share in the book about how difficult that transition was. And it occurred to me that it would appeal to a lot of our audience who were going through very similar transitions during that time and who are still going through it now over the time of 2012. So it started before that and it may still be going on now, and how it can relate and help people process what they went through at the time. And you explained in the book that there are 3 different types of transitions that anybody who's listening to this now are probably familiar with. But can you tell us a bit about the different stages of transition?
Yeah, well, the 3 pathways of transition which I found while writing the book, really. I started researching and giving talks and just kind of finding out, well, I'm going through a very difficult transition. What's happening with other people? So I found in writing the book, when I collected all these stories, there's 3 types of transition. The first one is smooth transition, which most people will probably recognize. It's quite a nice one, smooth, right? It's kind of, it's where usually it's where we know we're coming towards some kind of change in our life. Before I explain that, I should just say a transition is an inner and outer change. It's not just an outer change. It's where something changes on the inside. It's where really an old phase of life ends and a new one begins. That's essentially what a transition is. Whereas a change is just, well, we change house, we change girlfriend, we change jobs, we move to another continent, but basically we're the same person, So, but a transition changes us on the inside out.
Yeah.
So a smooth transition is where we get the feeling, my current life, something, it's not quite right. There's something else. It may be, for some people, it means leaving something. You could leave a marriage, for example, or a job to go towards some unknown something or other. You could leave a marriage, be single for a while, and then something else happens. Or it can mean that you go directly towards something, like it might be that you meet your soulmate. It might mean that you decide to start a business. It might mean you start to have a baby, want to have a baby. You go towards something and you follow it out of your own volition. You make the choice. And the choice is the big defining factor in the whole thing. So you make the choice. So that's a smooth transition. Doesn't mean it's not challenging. It doesn't mean strange things might not happen on the way. You might not, you might kind of not end up exactly where you thought you would, but somewhere better probably, usually. A rough transition is where you get the feeling, my life needs to change, but I'm not going to do it. I'm going to resist it. I'm going to lock the door. I'm going to keep, in The Hobbit where Gandalf knocks on the door and says, come on an adventure. And Bilbo says, go down the road. There are other people interested in that, not me.
Yeah.
That's a rough transition is where we refuse the journey, and eventually we're whisked on the journey against our will in some shape or form. So this usually happens through a catalyst. A catalyst enters our lives. It could be a lover enters our lives, a redundancy, an accident, a death of a loved one. Something happens that shifts and changes everything, That's kind of like the metaphor I like to use is often like having a boat in a harbor. So whereas a smooth transition is you sail out to sea and go, I'm going to explore the horizon and see what's over there. A rough transition is where you're pulled out to sea, really against your will, and it's kind of a bit of a rough journey. The third one is super rough, and the super rough one usually involve some kind of existential crisis, of identity, of meaning, of direction, of purpose. It's like I don't know who I am anymore. So yes, it's a rough transition, but it's super rough because you, on the inside, you feel a bit lost.
Mm.
In my own case, the super rough one grabbed me, and I went through a dark night of the soul. It started off with a Kundalini experience, which was a trigger
Hmm.
in a tantric exercise, and then I got thrown into this dark night of the soul, which was beyond depression. It was like descending into some form of personal hell. Really, it was horrible,
Mm.
and that happened twice in this super rough transition. I looked around for all kinds of help. I went and saw about 18 or so healers, and most of them didn't have any clue as to what was happening. Even the healing system that I'd worked with for many years, about 15 years at that time, stopped working, which was very scary.
Mm.
And I mean, eventually one person helped me, but it was a very slow process of coming back and
Mm.
trying to work out what happened. But there was a strong spiritual element to it. I was having strange visions, weird dreams. Strange things were happening to me. There was a period of 10 days in which when my energy field started going crazy, basically. I could feel, I just really was very intense, and I was blowing up things around me. Crystals were blowing up in my hand. A healer put a hand on the back of my heart, and she had a kind of shell ring, carved shell ring, blew up into 100
Wow.
pieces. I was blowing up internet connections. I blew up the whole electrics of my house. I
Mm.
took my son to see a film at IMAX at Waterloo. The projector blew up. All the tickets had to be refunded. I mean, because it happened every day to me, I was kind of getting the feeling, yeah, this is me doing it.
Hmm.
When I told people about it, particularly in the alternatives office, they looked at me and was like, I was crazy. I said, I'm going for a walk now. I can't be here anymore. I need to get out. Um, so that was really my experience of rough transition. Now, all of those transitions can point to something dramatically wonderful happening at the end of it.
Mm.
Um, but some of the processes, particularly of the rough and super rough, is difficult.
Mm. Absolutely. And I think in reading the book, I like the way that after a few pages in, I realised that a lot of these transitions, especially in the human sense, so the end of a relationship or having to sell a home, we'd class that normally as failure.
Yeah.
And that would be the old language. And you sort of gently take us into the concept in the book that it's not failure, it's a transition because it's supposed to happen and your life will be better for it happening, and that it's beyond us. This is happening for a reason because we're moving beyond something that didn't work and going into something that will work much better for you. So
Yeah.
it helps you process why these things happened in the past anyway, and helps you have a different perspective while you're going through it. Even if you just use the word transition, that makes it sound more manageable
Yes,
when you're
and
going.
there are stages to the transition which I talk about in the book. But basically, the essence of it is something ends, an old phase of life ends, and a new one begins, and something happens in the middle. And that something happens could be very different for different people.
Mm. And I think in if you know that if you have that knowledge where it takes you through the tools in the book, it stops you from letting go. It stops you from holding on to what was. And if you let go, then you're more likely to have a smoother transition than if you try to let go and think, no, this shouldn't have happened. So I
Yeah.
thought that was really empowering. Like the subtitle of the book says, beyond the comfortable into the real. Because any time we're moved into that uncomfortability, we think there's something wrong, when really that's the beginning of significant growth.
Yeah, the ego doesn't like that kind of inner and out of change usually, especially with the smooth one, it can cope with it but it's kind of gets scary, and usually if you're in a smooth transition, you need a support group, people who are kind of out there encouraging you. But the rough and super rough, the ego goes a bit crazy because it goes, "What the hell are you doing?" And so yeah, really the process is also about transformation of the ego as well.
Yes, absolutely. And I recognise where you explained in the book that you felt like your connection to higher self was blown.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people will recognise that feeling, and where especially where you said that something was working for a long period of time and it just stopped working. That's a
Mm.
very scary thing for a lot of our listeners who have a regular spiritual practice. If that didn't work all of a sudden. What does that mean? How do you keep your faith amongst that period? And I think if you're in the middle of that now, what would you suggest people do in order to see a way out or to see the light?
Well, if something's ending, it's very easy if it is something you really don't like. You
Mm,
know, if it's a job you don't like, a relationship that you don't like, it's easy. If it's a relationship that you do very much like, or a career you very much like, which was the case of, in my case, I was in a relationship which I had a deep love for my partner, and also I loved the home we were living in, and I loved the career I was in.
mhm,
And at the same time, I felt this kind of itch of, yeah, but it doesn't quite work in the same way, all of it, you know. But I thought, but I love it. I can't possibly change this. You know, I've spent all 20 years getting to this place, and now I'm in a life that I love. Why would I let go of it? So my
mm,
resistance was incredible, which is why it was such a difficult transition for me.
yes.
So what creates the pain is our attachment to the old.
Mm,
Now, that sounds a very easy statement, but and I know that when I heard it, I'm like, yeah, but it doesn't help me because I love this life. Why should I let it go?
mm,
So in a way, it's going to be a process of really, when it took me a time to really see, even though I love it, it doesn't work for me anymore. And the best thing I could do is let it go with blessing. And that took a long time, really, because there was nothing on the horizon to replace it. You know, there was
yeah,
no partner, there was no other work there. So, and there was no other home that I loved. So these big three anchors, it was very tough.
mm,
But really, it's like stepping into the unknown and trusting that there is a higher power, even if you can't feel it. And I couldn't feel it, which was very scary because I always relied on that intuition or that guidance, which was very strong over the years. You know, I'd
mm.
developed it in a number of courses and working with channels and energy healing systems. And suddenly it was cut off. So not only was that gone, I had to trust that something was there that I couldn't see, and I had no sense of knowing where it was.
Yes.
So
And
trust, that is really that. I think the only thing I could describe it as Jesus on the cross saying, "God, why have you forsaken me?" It's that moment where you go, "The light has left me, and I don't think I'm in a good position, but it's all right anyway. It is all
mm,
right."
absolutely, I think that's a good analogy because just after a transition or coming to the end of it, there's a void, and that void is there maybe to teach us that trusting issue, where we're saying even though there's a void here, we trust that something this is happening for a bigger reason,
Yeah,
and that nothingness is creating space for something new to come in. But I find that's the part people get stuck in because they feel that void as emptiness, and the sense of failure and doubt and things, that sense of why have you forsaken me comes in.
yeah,
And I think reading this book, just reading the whole, sort of taking a step back and looking at the whole journey from a higher perspective, then if you can see that the void is just time for you to get used to something new coming in, that could help people go through the transition and make it smoother.
yeah, for
And if
sure.
if you understand also that the we're supposed to go through this transition, is bigger than us, it's planetary, and that we're supposed to, this is happening because it's inevitable. Do are there is the part beyond the book, is that you now teaching how we can handle that change?
Yeah, well, the book is really addressing. I mean, sorry, the at the end of the book, I just give my, you know, I point the way, saying I'm really heading into the kind of beyond the transition. This is, and I talk about the kind of early stages of my new life, but this book is this workshop, sorry, is really spiritual, the real spiritual dimension of it, and I'm looking at what I can. The different kind of people that will come to the workshop are really going to be people who consider themselves light workers, or indigos, or crystal children, or star seeds, or these kind of people, because I'm really going into the energetics of what's happening on planet Earth now, and what's happening to us because of that shift, what's happening to the planet in terms of ascension, what are the problems that we're now encountering because of all these new energies hitting the planet, and all these, and a lot of people are being incarnated here with new energies. So the planet itself is going through a very radical shift from a very old way of being, which was kind of like, for, if you look at the history, you've only got to look at the history books to see, or the news, what kind of planet we've been living on for thousands of years. It's been like war, violence. I'm going to nick your resources. I'm going to invade you. or all this kind of stuff. And it's still going on now. You only got to read the news and see none of that is really changing, despite all our democracy and systems we've got. There's a kind of crisis on the planet of light and dark, the old paradigm of the dark. And when I mean dark, I mean that kind of thing of like thousands of years of war, of torture, of religious dogma, of control, manipulation. All of that is ending, and a new way is kicking off. But that new way hasn't started yet. So we're kind of in this kind of it's almost like two rivers are kind of kicking up against each other, and so how do we cope with this? And especially if you're a light worker, sensitive, you can sense energy, you can sense light, you can maybe have a connection to your higher self or guides or any of these things. What do you do when you're living in a world where there's still a lot of that dark manipulation going on, even though it's leaving the planet, which I'll be talking about that in the workshop. So we're in this kind of confluence where an old paradigm is going, a new one's kicking in, but still very much we have to deal with a lot of energetic stuff. And so on the workshop, I'm going to be looking at stuff around riding these new energies that come in. How do we stay connected to, I'm calling it the Christ grid that's being put around the planet now, because the old grid that was on the earth, the old kind of matrix of energy, is kind of crumbling and dissolving. That's causing a crisis for certain institutions. There's a lot of dark stories coming out in the news. That's part of that energetics of the old matrix going. So it's really like, what are the tools that we have available to us now to clear some of the stuff that we have to deal with? Because a big problem for light workers and star seeds, and on the workshop I'll explain, unless you want to know now, I can explain what those terms mean. And there are tools where, sorry?
That would be great. I think a lot of people know that they would be classed as something, one of those terms, but it's very rarely explained what they are. So could you touch on a couple to see if people recognise that in themselves?
Yeah, well, a starseed, the idea of starseed is that the soul of the person has experienced more lives off planet or other dimensional than this dimension of Earth, because we're living in a multiverse of many dimensions where this Earth is just one plane amongst many. So a starseed is someone who's not native to this particular dimension of the Earth, but's coming here with a particular reason. And that reason is to kind of help in the awakening of the Earth, this transition into a different kind of age of the Earth. Now, there are also Earth seeds. Now, Earth seeds are souls who've been here a long time. They're kind of used to the ways of the Earth. They kind of know how it works, but at the same time, they have been heavily conditioned and locked into the old matrix. So for Earth seeds, it's a little bit more scarier that the Earth is shifting, whereas for star seeds, it's kind of more exciting, like, yay, hey, yippee, yeah, the Earth's changing. Star seeds have greater connection to other dimensions and other extraterrestrial races, like particularly races like the Pleiadians and the Syrians are particularly ones I've got a connection with, but there are others. And these races have had strong connections with the Earth over the last, hundreds of thousands of years. These races are still involved on the Earth, and they're both negative and positive races involved on the Earth at the moment. So that's something also to be discussed. Nothing to be afraid of course, but something to be discussed. Starseeds are holding less karma here and hold more potential. They're in their DNA structure or the kind of the energetics of the DNA. It's very different potential structure than the Earth seeds. They have more awakened chakra systems. They're coming in almost like all centers blazing, and that can be very difficult, because for thousands of years the Earth has been dumbed down spiritually. Most people have only got the first 3 chakras engaged. The rest have been scrambled, like the base, sacral, and solar plexus. Really, a lot of these, so the indigos and crystals coming in are these kind of souls coming in with a real purpose of bringing in a new energetic structure. So the kind of DNA is shifting in people. This is really the whole ascension process I'm talking about. There is, with this shift, a lot of the kind of old energies are going. This is not the only dimension of the Earth. There are other dimensions of this Earth, and on some of those, there's a kind of the timeline on this dimension is shifted. There's no destruction going to happen on planet Earth. That was the case when I was born, actually. when I was born and when a lot of people were born, it wasn't certain whether this Earth would actually survive beyond the year 2000, because a lot of the predictions were of destruction and terrible things happening on the Earth. You know, you just got to read the Bible and the Book of Revelations. Most of that has been shifted and stopped by the level of consciousness on the planet. I'll be
Mm.
talking about that in the workshop. So a lot of Nostradamus' predictions are not happening. You know, the revelations are not happening exactly like that. But we are going to we are going to have Earth changes. Some people might leave the planet, but it's not going to be as drastic as it was before.
Mhm.
But we're left with a kind of there's a kind of spiritual challenges that we're left with at the moment, because of the old matrix of the Earth. There's a lot of stuff to be cleared. There are tools to clear it with. There's a lot of old what I call dead light zones that we need to clear in our energy field. There's lots of karma. There's lots of old programs of other lifetime abuse and difficulty. There's also ancestral programs. There's a whole load of spiritual stuff I need to talk about on the workshop itself.
Yes, and I think it's interesting that you called it the Christ grid,
Oh yeah,
because a lot of people will look at that as a beacon for hope, because in Jesus' time we would look at it and think that he was one man who changed the whole world. And people looking at the world now, sometimes we feel hopeless or disempowered because the majority of the world seem to be more interested in war or greed, and and things that we feel like are out of our control. But we have to understand that it will just take a small number of us to change it if we raise
yeah,
our consciousness enough. And so Christ was the one of the primary examples for that, where it doesn't take a lot of people to affect significant change.
yeah,
And I think it's about our own capacities. What this workshop will do is to increase your own capacity. It will teach you how to harness your new capacities for to get the message out there, to affect change in other people, to affect change in our communities and our world, so that we can make meaningful change in these systems that we believe aren't working anymore.
yeah. Well, the Christ grid is really being held by a lot of one of the mission of some of the star seeds and indigos is to hold this new grid on the planet, and so there are people holding this and building this. I mean, I worked with channels for many years helping to build a light grid. So it's fascinating work, and you connect with all kinds of angels and masters on the other side doing the same work. But
Mm.
also you can connect to it. It's a great resource for energy and sustenance. As the old grid of control dissolves, this new grid, I mean, you can't just, if you just dissolve the old grid without putting something new in place energetically, you'd have chaos on the planet.
Mm.
So this new Christ grid, I mean, an energy grid of any kind like this is informational, contains information, contains energy, contains a connection between us and the universe around. It's really source energy, what people call God or God, Goddess, all that is. It's a way of connecting to much higher vibrations that are stepped down so that our nervous system can tolerate it. Because the trouble is, if you take on too much light, it can blow your nervous system, of course, it all in one go. So you have to do it bit by bit, not just dive in and, yeehaw, light grids, here I go,
Yeah.
blow up.
Absolutely. I think some of us feel that we have the potential or capacity to connect and do work for things like that. But do you think everyone on Earth has that capacity and it's dormant, or do you think there are chosen
Um,
ones?
Well, as I mentioned before, the star seeds are going to come in, and as soon as you mention it, even if they've never heard of it before, if they're sitting in a workshop, they'll be drawn to the material. They don't know
Mm.
why they're drawn. They'll become to the material. They'll hear it and they'll get it. They'll start waking up, and it'll make sense to them, and they'll just get the energy. Their centers will start sparking open. Because a lot of the thing with star seeds, they come here, most of them fall asleep. We're still
Mm.
bothered by this old matrix, this energetic matrix. If you had a room full of earth seeds and you started talking about this stuff, they'll just like be shaking their heads going, call in the psychiatrists.
Mm.
What are you talking about? So it really is the audience you're talking to. Star seeds, like, all these people get it. Earth seeds, it's not that they're not connected, but they just don't understand. There's too much programming. It's a bit like the film The Matrix, they never disconnect a mind that's been in the matrix too long,
Mm.
and they've been in the matrix too long for you to, if you unplug it, it will be terrifying.
Yes.
Whereas starseeds coming in are not so connected, are not terrified by it. In fact, they're here to do this job.
Mm. And I think that's the sign. If you read anything about this, or the words of the description of this workshop resonate with you in any way, that's the sign.
Yeah,
Because if it didn't, you wouldn't be reading it in the first place.
yeah.
So if any, because parts, I know that when I'm reading through things, something will make me think, and I'll just be more interested than I would in something else. And that's the only sign you need. That is a sign that you have the capacity, even if you don't have the words for it yet.
And I know you love this material, Venetia.
I love this material. I mean, I started reading about, for when you were talking about Indigo Child, for example, I started reading about it years before I found out I was an Indigo Child. And
Yeah.
that there's a reason, because I was drawn to it because on some level I knew before I had the language for it. I just thought it was something I was interested in. And I think there's a lot of people in our community like that, who are reading about it and who are interested before the knowledge that they are actually it, that
Yeah.
they are here to affect change, and that this is all just signs for you to awaken, so that you can be part of the change, the energy change. But as you said before, the earth changes sometimes just make you feel scrambled,
Yeah.
feel like you're in chaos and confusion. So I think this work really helps us get back into connection and activate these abilities that we know we have, so that we can use them for good.
Well, I think the next 2 years we're going to have massive energy. I mean, we're already started in 2015. We're heading for another one in September, another energy wave. It's going to keep coming on.
Mm-hmm.
And so people are, even star seeds will feel a bit scrambled and a bit confused. And it's all right. I mean, just to know it's all right. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm expecting on the workshop people who are more fully awake and been into the material for a long time, and new ones who go, I don't know why I'm here, but hey, it sounds interesting.
Mm.
All are welcome.
Exactly. And would you say that this workshop would give you practical tools about how to feel less chaotic?
I'm planning to do lots of clearing for people on the day, clearing out of cords, energy cords between themselves, and particularly the old matrix or the old timeline. If there's any cords connected to that, there's an issue I haven't mentioned, which is what I call dark soul family.
Mm,
Some star seeds have entered into soul families which are dark, and they've done it deliberately because they're trying to bring more light into those families. That's an issue that I'll talk about on the workshop. We'll look at that. I'll be looking at clearing chakras on the workshop. We'll be looking at clearing thought forms. Entities is a problem for most people,
mm-hmm.
and they're human and non-human entities. That most people have this in their energy field because we live in a kind of, the astral plane is filled with all kinds of rubbish, and particularly people on the spiritual journey go in there, meditate, open up, and they've got no idea that they could be picking up stuff.
Yeah.
So I'll be showing ways of getting rid of that kind of debris in the energy bodies, looking at way of returning soul fragments, releasing them and actually calling them back. We'll look at stuff around finding your soul tribe. We'll look at really like aligning with your highest, the timeline of this earth, which is ascending, really anchoring on that and letting go of the old timeline of the other earth, the old earth, which was heading for destruction.
Mm,
There's a lot of, and I'm sure people will be bringing up issues on the day and we'll be looking at it. I'll be bringing along a load of energy charts. I do SRT, which is like pendulum work.
mm,
So with inner meditations, pendulum work, clearing exercises, I'll be a lot of clearing and a lot of anchoring people to the kind of Christ grid on the day.
mm. Wonderful. I think we've, at Alternatives, we've heard a lot about this in theory. So a
Yeah,
lot about entities and opening up to, because when you open your capacities, you're open for the good, but you're open for the unknowable as well. And so we hear a lot about it, but we haven't had as many practical workshops to help us clear it and manage it and bring us back into alignment. So I think this sounds exactly, if anybody's out there and they're feeling that, and they're feeling they're opening up their capacities and bringing in maybe something they didn't want and they don't know how to clear it, then you can help them with that on the day.
yeah. And this is the first time really I've become public. I've been doing this kind of work behind the scenes for many years, but never really talking about it. Not even in alternatives, because I think eyebrows would be raised even in alternatives if I came out with this stuff.
Yes, and I
That's in
think
days gone by anyway.
absolutely. And then I think there is, on the flip side, that section of the audience, like me, like the people listening, who are thinking, finally, at last, you're here. And this is exactly the right time. And the workshop's on October the 4th, which will be, as you said, just after the next major Earth change in September.
Yeah.
So the perfect time to come along and learn more about, being able to manage these capacities and to connect to a higher self. the
Yeah.
next dimension. And a good way to practicalize everything you've been reading about, everything you've been learning about alternatives, this is the practical next step. And I feel like this is the practical next step from your book as well, where it talks about personal transitions, the spiritual transition. It's a change of perception, so we're going higher, next level. It's almost as if the 2012 part is over, where we were hearing about the earth changes. Now it's time to do something about it and empower ourselves with the capacities it's allowed us to have.
Yeah, definitely. You know, it's almost we haven't got a lot of time to kind of do the work. We've got to really time speeding up. We in the old days we'd have a shaman to do a kind of soul retrieval, but now we've got to do almost like 12 soul retrievals at once. You know,
Mm,
very quickly. We can't. There's no time to waste anymore.
no, and I think people listening can feel that things are moving faster, that you can feel the momentum of everything just moving faster and transitions happening more quickly and changes within yourself happening more quickly. And I think those are the sort of people to come to this workshop. And on the other side, if you feel stagnant because you feel like things aren't moving, that's an energetic problem as well. And you need to come to this workshop because it will help with both of those issues.
Yeah, once the energy stuff sorted out, the stuff around like life direction and life purpose and mission all get clearer, a lot clearer.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I'm really looking forward to that, Steve. Again, it's on the website now. If you go to alternatives.org.uk, you can book for the workshop, and I'll be there participating as well. I'm really looking forward to it.
I've hooked you in, Venetia.
Oh, I can't wait. Really looking forward to learning more about this, and hopefully it'll be the first of many bringing us into this work.
Okay, great. Thanks, Venetia.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Steve. See you then.